Hi, Corey.
Hello.
Sorry about that. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. So it's what, Wednesday morning and
Wednesday morning. Love it. Halfway
excellent.
through the week. And
Great. Have
you're in Wednesday afternoon already?
Yeah, it's about 3 o'clock here. So I've just got back from taking my daughter up to look at a new university she's going to
Oh,
in
okay.
about
Where?
3 weeks' time. So yeah, she's moved over here from Hong Kong. We were living in Hong Kong for quite some time, which is where I met James. And then
Uh-huh.
we've been back about 2 years, and now she's adapted pretty well to the way back here. And then now it's the big send off to university. So
Send off. I love it. Where is she headed?
she's going to Loughborough, which is in
Okay.
Leicestershire in the Midlands,
Yep.
and she's doing psychology with criminology. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's
she's
amazing.
that's one of her strengths is psychology. She's into that in a big way. So yeah, it should be good.
That's awesome. My fiance is actually from London, so I am familiar with a lot of the universities because his
Yeah.
parents, yeah, so
Okay.
yeah.
Great. So how did you get into this? I mean, it's quite it's a big role you have, and
Yes.
I was kind of curious how you got into it, because I don't think you came up through a traditional hospitality background, so to speak.
Yeah. So I studied in undergrad Earth Society and the Environment. But when I graduated, this was kind of at the start of what I would call like the sustainability revolution, where when I graduated, there really wasn't any roles in corporate sustainability. Most of what I could have pursued was research, and I didn't want to do research. So I actually went into public relations and worked on our purpose team. So my like agency's purpose team, meaning all of my clients were social impact.
Yeah.
So working on General Mills regenerative agriculture, working on P&G, Procter& and Gamble's plant-based laundry detergents, and I felt like I was really interested in the work I was doing, but I wasn't using as much of my background in sustainability as I could have been.
Right.
So, fast forward, the pandemic hit. I realized that I really wanted to make a switch so that I could do some more strategy work. And I went back to school and I got my master's in energy and sustainability with a focus in sustainable food systems. So,
Great.
majority of the classes were future of food, water, sustainable agriculture, very focused in on the food system.
Yeah.
And I thought that I had wanted to work at, a company like Sweet Green or Whole Foods. But when I graduated, I realized that I think I could actually make the biggest impact working at a company that is, in a sense, less sustainable. So when
Right.
I came across this role at Shake Shack, it was a perfect fit because we sell meat and we sell shakes, and those are both reliant on heavy carbon emitting ingredients.
Right.
So felt like this would be a really good fit for me. And I've been here 2 years and absolutely love it and have already made a really big impact on what we're doing in the sustainability space and hoping to just continue to do that.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah. I was, in hotel operations for a long time, and then on the development side. And then my last role was actually running a teaching research hotel in Hong
Wow.
Kong, which was owned by a university. So I sort of spent about 25% of my time teaching and doing research and using the hotel as a sort of a laboratory, if you like. And then
Cool.
the rest of the time was actually managing the hotel. So I opened it for the university. I did the pre-opening, which was like 2 years, and then we opened in 2011. And I basically stayed there for the entire next 13 years, developing the brand and doing a lot of experimental stuff. And it was really interesting. And one of my real areas of interest was in the sort of sustainability, lowering the carbon impact of hotels, which are
Yeah.
huge users of
Yeah.
energy. So I'm now sort of helping an apparel company who
Okay.
are based in Hong Kong, who are using AI actually, and a sort of supply as a supply chain network, to not only manufacture sustainable linen, but
Mhm.
also to speed up the whole sort of supply chain process of it, and also cut out all the sort of designer costs. So if
Mhm.
you imagine a big chain, if they're constantly changing their uniforms, have to hire designers. So it's all, you can literally key in the DNA brand messaging of the brand, and then it will come up with different types of uniforms based on different types of fabric. So I do a blog for them, and what I'm really trying to do is to develop an interest within the greater sort of hospitality community around sustainability. So what I'm trying to do is to sort of talk to really interesting people like you that are coming from the non-traditional hospitality, not so much pure hotels, because I
Mhm.
feel that during COVID, certainly hotels hit a bit of a roadblock,
Yeah.
if you're a franchise property, it's even more difficult because you've got to follow the corporate line.
Yeah.
And I was really intrigued to see what you were doing. I've been following you on LinkedIn and looking at all the initiatives. I saw you at the pig farm and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that type of stuff, and it's really amazing. So I think that the three questions that you posed to me are fantastic, and what I'm going to do is really, Corey, if it's okay with you, is just let you talk about those
Yeah.
three areas, and then if I try not to interject, and just let you kind of go with the flow, and then you can talk us through it, and then maybe I did think about a fourth question at the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I can throw in there. There, it's really more about how, with energy costs,
Mhm.
and I know, having run hotels and big buffets, in Asia, buffets are very big,
Yeah.
as James will attest to. I mean, everybody goes to eat in buffets, and you've got massive spaces and lots of heat and lots of exhaust and that type of stuff.
Totally.
And having been to your outlets in Hong Kong, they are very efficiently designed. I mean, incredibly efficiently designed. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that at the end, as a sort of a fourth question.
Yeah.
But why don't you go ahead, and then we'll, I'm sure the listeners will love to hear all about what you're doing.
Yeah. Happy to. And feel free if you have any questions as I'm talking, just interject or comments, anything.
Okay,
I happy to have like a more conversational, but I'm also
sure,
happy
sure,
to just walk
sure, sure.
through. So just to start, I kind of thought it'd be nice to take you through what sustainability looks like at Shake Shack and what initiatives we're currently working on or that are underway. So for my role as the sustainability specialist, I run point on sustainability at Shake Shack overall, which means I touch all aspects of the business from supply chain to marketing to legal to even construction and design, which I think is, to your point, a really important piece in the hospitality business. How are we building our restaurants, our hotels? How are we utilizing the resources? So I'll touch on that, but I kind of thought maybe I'll walk through each of these and give you a little insight into what I do for each of these. So I would say my focus really is on our supply chain. As a food and beverage company, we rely on the ingredients that we source. So a lot of agricultural outputs. And I think that that's kind of where my focus is, my high priority, if you will. Ultimately, I look at all of our ingredients and figure out, are there any ingredients that we can make switches to, whether that be the actual ingredient or a supplier we're using to make it more sustainable. So I'll give you a good example here, but we obviously sell milkshakes. It's in our name, Shake Shack.
Yeah,
And we, for our milkshakes, use fluid dairy. Fluid dairy is associated with higher emissions. The dairy and the meat industry, are heavy hitters. So when I came on board, I immediately said, okay, meat and dairy are two high impact ingredients. How can we address this? I did a lot of research, joined a lot of conversations, had a lot of calls with different companies, and found a company called Neutral. based out of the Pacific Northwest here in America. They are a carbon neutral milk company. And I had always been very hesitant about these big, lofty claims, carbon neutral, like carbon negative. I'm very aware of the background of some of these. I know there's a lot of hesitancy. Is it real? Is it not? So, really dug in with their team to figure out what carbon neutral actually means to them. And high level, they reduce emissions at the site. So, they implement projects that are going to reduce methane associated with the dairy industry. So that could be anaerobic digestion, that could be feeding the cows a supplement that helps lower the methane they emit when they burp and they fart and all that sexy stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but what they can't reduce, because nothing is carbon neutral or carbon negative, there's always going to be carbon associated with everything that's done.
Yeah.
They offset. So traditionally, I am very conscious that offsetting is, not the best way forward, but we're not going to be able to hit zero. Like, there would be no carbon neutral, carbon negative without offsetting. I just want to make that
Right.
clear. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a big misconception in the industry. So what they don't, what they can't reduce at the source, I'd say they actually carbon inset. They put money toward projects on the farm that will reduce emissions. So
Mm.
we were able to switch more than 90 of our locations to use neutral milk instead of conventional dairy milk. We then, at the end of the year, we're able to look at, okay, if we had only sourced conventional milk at these locations, what would the emissions have been? And then what are the emissions associated, with neutral? And we saw that there was a huge reduction in CO2
Wow.
from
That's
that
brilliant.
switch, which is great. And for us, it was, pretty seamless supply chain transition. The milk tastes the same. How the shacks receive the milk is the same. Consumers didn't even realize we made this switch. It doesn't cost more. We're not putting cost on consumers. So, very seamless transition. And that's basically
Right.
what I'm trying to replicate across our entire supply chain. So,
Okay.
from a supply chain perspective, that's kind of an example.
Can I
Yeah.
just ask a question
Yes.
there? When you were looking at this, was cost a factor in the sense that it might cost these farmers more? I
Mhm.
mean, do they pass the cost on to you? And was that something that when you went to present this
Yeah.
idea to your bosses, I mean, was that something they were cognizant of, or were they, or is there no cost difference?
So, luckily, there was no cost difference for this scenario.
Okay.
But
Right.
yes, cost is definitely one
Yeah.
of the main concerns. We are a business, and most businesses, I think, will say, okay, first question when you're presenting anything is, well, what's the cost? What is their cost
Yeah.
difference?
Right.
So I'm always looking to see, is there, a way I can make a business case for this if it does cost more? Are we
Right. Right.
able to, is it going to increase brand awareness? Because I don't think it's always necessarily like a monetary
Mm.
aspect. It could even be like a brand story.
Yeah.
Um, and I was actually just talking to someone about this earlier today, but I think that, I don't want to put any increased cost on consumers for sustainability. I
Yeah.
I don't think consumers will actually pay more for it.
Right.
And I don't
Right.
think it's necessarily fair to blame the consumer and have them pay. I think businesses and the government need to step up and find a way where we're kind of taking the brunt of the cost, first pushing on
Right.
consumers,
Yeah.
which is kind of how I lead, my work at Shake Shack. I don't think we will do anything that would raise the cost for consumers because
Yeah. Yeah.
sadly, we've seen in guest surveys, they say that they're willing to pay more, but then when it actually comes time, they don't pay
Mm.
more. And so I don't want
Right.
that to be a barrier of entry for our guests. I want them to be able to continue to continue to enjoy the foods that we serve without paying more just because it
Yeah.
comes from a different source.
Right. So is it true to say that if there was if you were to ask your customers whether they would prefer something that was low carbon footprint, sustainable versus organic,
Mm, mhm.
do you think that they would go more for the organic, or is it kind of a split, or is sometimes the those type of low hanging fruit that you say, let's say you have huge consumption of, because I know you have a limited menu,
Yep,
right? I mean, it's not like some fast food chain where you have
totally.
a massive range. So I've, being a regular consumer, my kids love the product
Yeah, they
too.
love
I think that you obviously have a kind of a tight control on what you offer. I mean, like for instance, I know in Hong Kong you don't sell coffee,
that. Mhm.
um, but so if it's largely like bacon or meat or bread, and milk, these are very fundamental things. Is it true that sometimes a product that is sustainable and low carbon could also be organic
Mhm.
as well, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this leads into a really good point that I'd love to bring up, and it's consumers don't necessarily understand what all of these claims mean. And I find
Okay.
that we are now having trouble where, for instance, I'm a big proponent of regenerative agriculture. I am
Right.
really passionate about it. I think that when we talk about how we're going to, mitigate climate change and continue to feed the growing population, regenerative agriculture is a very important piece of the puzzle. That said, we've done surveys around, guest insight, and consumers don't know what regenerative agriculture means. To them, they
Right.
think it's cell-based meat, which it's completely different from.
Right.
So there's this big gap, and we're still trying to figure out. I honestly think it's the million-dollar question, and all other brands
Yeah.
are kind of struggling with this too. What do consumers actually care about? If they are willing to pay more for a product, what is the like attribute that they're willing to pay more for? Is it organic? Is it regenerative? Is it grass fed? Is it so there's just so many claims. Even I get confused when I walk into the grocery store
Yeah.
and I'm picking out eggs, for instance, and oh my gosh, all the
Mm,
claims. And
absolutely.
my
Yeah.
fiance will be like, "Which egg should I get?" And I even like I'm like a deer in headlights. I'm like, he's like, "Don't you know all about this?" I'm like, "Yes, of course I know all about it, but there are claims there that I don't even think need to be there necessarily."
Yeah.
So same with like the chicken that you buy at the grocery store where it's no antibiotics and no hormones, and there's just so much
Mm,
messaging, and I think it's kind of
yeah.
fatiguing for the consumer to have to sort through it and figure out what it
Right.
is. So I think that is a huge piece that I'm working on and
Mm.
figuring out.
So presumably, when you do strike up a deal with a
Yeah.
supplier like the milk one,
Mhm.
are you careful about not going out and making lofty claims and just sort of do it quietly, or do you actually promote it
Yeah.
at the moment? Have you made a decision about that?
I kind of think it's dependent on the scenario.
Yeah.
I think transparency and radical transparency is very important in sustainability.
Yeah.
I don't want to not talk about something because I'm worried that we're going to get feedback. Well, why is it only at 90 locations versus all locations? I don't think that's fair when
Yeah.
progress over perfection, especially in sustainability,
Yes.
which is a newer field and, it's ever evolving really. That said, I think there are certain things that I don't want to just publicize because I think that we should be doing it anyways. So by,
Right.
publicizing it, I don't want it to be virtue signaling or greenwashing. I want it to be authentic. I was really proud of the
Right.
90 locations. I get that we, obviously have more than 90 locations, but I still think
Yeah.
that this is a big step forward. Um, Another example is we have a really cool pilot program right now with Mill, which is a smart composting bin here in the United States. And we use a mill bin in our West Village location and in our innovation kitchen. Basically, in our prep area when we have ingredients that aren't being used. So think heads of lettuce or like the bottom of the lettuce, um, the onion peels, ingredients that aren't necessarily edible for consumers. We use this
Right.
bin to compost it, but it actually basically turns it into food grounds that then are sent to mill and used as an additive to chicken feed. So based on the
Mm,
EPA food waste hierarchy of recovery, it's actually better than composting because we're feeding animals, which in the
great.
triangle actually goes above
Yeah.
composting. So
Right.
we're only doing this at 2 locations. So I didn't want to make it a huge deal. I don't want to, put forward a
Mm,
press release. I don't want to do all these things because
yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
it to be virtue signaling and us saying, oh, look at this cool
Sure.
thing we're doing. But we can't at large restaurants s- automatically do it at all locations. That's just not how it
Mm,
works. You have to test to make sure logistically, operationally, it works before you can even expand.
right.
So I think that's just something you don't think about until you're actually in the restaurant space. I knew
Right.
prior me would have been like, well, why aren't they doing it at more locations? Now I'm
Yeah.
thinking, well, operationally, I need to get feedback from our team members. Does it does it
Right.
work? Is it a hassle? Can it fit in the location before I can continue to build the program?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you have like a hit list right now of, say, low hanging fruit that you can think, we use huge volumes of this particular food ingredient, all around the world, whether it be Hong Kong or wherever, and then say, right, we're trying to look for meat or bacon or bread or whatever it is. Is that how it works? And then if you don't see opportunities, then you just sort of move on to the next one. I mean, how do you prioritize what you're
Yeah.
looking at from your
So
perspective?
internally, I made a materiality matrix or assessment, which basically looks at what is material to our business, but also to our guests and stakeholders. So, stakeholders being
Okay.
abroad could include guests, could include employees, could include investors, and then
Yeah.
kind of plotting. And this is a pretty common thing in the sustainability space. So if you're listening and you're into sustainability, I'm sure you've heard of this, but ultimately you plot all of the different points and assess it based on what's important to the stakeholders but important to the business. And the top right quadrant is what I'm most interested in. So to start
Okay.
with, that is basically what is important to the business, but also to stakeholders. So for us as a food company, I mentioned it earlier, ingredient sourcing is always top of mind. As a fast casual space, a lot of our guests are taking their food to go, which means packaging and waste. So that's also
Mm,
another heavy hitting item up there in the top right quadrant that I'm thinking of.
right.
Also thinking about water. I'm thinking about employee engagement. These are all, I wouldn't say low hanging fruit because a lot of them are very complicated, but this is just how I was
Yes.
able to kind of figure out what I want to work on first. What has the biggest impact with the lowest lift, so to say?
Mm,
Um, and
yeah.
that's kind of where I've been working, what I've been working on.
Okay. Great. Well, that's amazing. And I think that from a consumer's perspective, I mean, one of the things that people love about your product is that it's sort of uniqueness and its simplicity, if you like. It's not trying to overcomplicate things, and it just you give people what they like, what they want. What other sort of initiatives would you say are currently underway to sort of move that needle forward? And do you have like a do you work to a 3 year plan or a 5 year plan, or how do you
Yeah.
approach it?
So still figuring that one out. For right now, I mean, obviously forward looking, I'm trying to plan for as far out as I can, figuring out exactly
Yeah.
how we can hit our internal sustainability goals. I think one thing that I'm working on, and basically what you said is true. People love Shake Shack. They love our brand. They love our product. It's high
Mm,
quality. It tastes good. It's consistent. And I think we rely on our suppliers to give us high
yeah.
quality ingredients
Right.
that we can then, share with our guests. So one
Sure.
ongoing project is I am working closely with our suppliers to figure out what they're doing in the sustainability space. Is there ways I
Mm,
can help them? How can Shake Shack partner with our suppliers to move the needle on sustainability?
yeah.
So I also think that this is an important part about how businesses can help scale sustainability. when we require our suppliers to do certain things or we hold them accountable saying, okay, I want to hear everything you're doing in the sustainability space, and we really ask them
Right.
to make investments in sustainability, it has a domino effect because some of the suppliers we use, other restaurants are using them as well. And when they put pressure on them also, it can really change behavior, and these big suppliers can then, focus on sustainability. So I think that
Yeah.
that's a huge an important piece of what we're working on currently, and figuring out how we can help support our suppliers and how they can help support us in our sustainability goals.
Right. Are just out of interest, are your current suppliers allowed to tell the public that they supply to Shake Shack? Like in the UK, people, you'd see
Yeah.
that crest of
Yeah.
the royal
Yeah.
family, saying that it's
Yep.
by appointment to the royal family. I mean, I mean that carries a lot of weight, presumably. If a meat supplier says we supply to Shake Shack, um, I guess there would be, some sense of, appreciation from the supplier, and at the same time, it's almost like an
Yeah,
endorsement,
no.
isn't it?
And I mean, I think we're really proud of all of the partners we have and who supply
Yeah.
us. So we're not trying to hide anything. We
No.
take really great pride and take a lot of time to find supplier partners who we feel confident in and we're proud to, work with. So
Right.
I don't think necessarily it's something we've ever shied away from. Um, I do think,
No.
you know,
But
yeah,
you
yeah,
allow it.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you allow it. Yeah. So, I mean, looking at the packaging side, I agree. I mean, that's a huge, other than rising energy costs. I mean, in terms of reducing carbon footprint, I mean, sometimes when you walk up Oxford Street in London or whatever, you know that you're approaching a fast food place because there's litter everywhere, and then there's bags, and I mean, they even have staff going up and down the
yeah,
street picking it up. I think certainly they used to anyway. I don't know whether they still do. But do you, on the packaging side, what are some of the initiatives that Shake Shack's been able to implement? Because I know you have boxes. I remember I was in Shake Shack about a week ago
mhm,
in Victoria, in London, near Victoria Station, the big one there. And my kids asked me to bring some home on the train. I live about 30 minutes away. So I
yeah,
needed a box. And they were a little bit reluctant to give me a box, maybe because they know that it's a wasteful material and it's quite heavy, and there's a cost associated. But I mean, they were helpful and they gave me one. And but when I said I was going on a train, I didn't want it to smell, and they're like, yeah, okay. But it's a pretty heavy duty box. I mean, it's an amazing. I
yeah.
mean, it really works. It keeps the food hot, and there's no smell. I mean, what sort of research goes into producing your packaging? I mean, how important is the
Yeah.
sustainability factor versus the
Yeah, I
practicality
mean, I
side of
think
it?
practicality likely outweighs sustainability in that sense because we want to
Yeah.
make sure that the food our guests are ordering tastes good, is is what they are expecting. So I definitely think that that
Mm.
actually probably does outweigh sustainability at a point. But of course, it's a consideration for
Yeah.
us. Packaging itself here in the US, we work a lot on figuring out where we can minimize packaging when available. So how can we, reduce at the source basically? Is there a way for us to fix the boxes so it actually uses less material? Where we can't do that, we look at sustainable alternatives. So one thing I'm really proud of is, we're working on identifying compostable packaging where it's legally required, and using that as knowledge for future to expand it elsewhere. Um, I think that this is where government regulation could really come into play because,
Yeah.
it does cost a lot more to have sustainable packaging. So if required by the government, more businesses would switch to it, and it could kind of create this like chain reaction where it ends up becoming
Mm.
more reasonably priced for restaurants and more people would then be using it. Um, but it's
Right.
definitely something we think about, and I hear you walking down the street, and I live in New York City, so you can imagine I see quite a lot of, uh, trash on the
Mm,
sidewalk, and it really hurts me to see that because
yeah.
there's a garbage can and we have really clear signage
Yeah.
on what could be recycled and what can't be. But of course, I mean, consumer education is always an aspect to that, and having people understand what is and isn't recyclable also can help with that.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question, if you like, about the role businesses can play in driving
Yep.
sustainability at scale. Perhaps you could talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that,
I mean,
Corey.
I think one of the notes that I mentioned earlier, holding our suppliers accountable is a huge portion of this. I also think
Yeah.
um, kind of advocating for businesses and governments to work together to help move the needle. Like I just said, I think that, when governments put regulations or require specific, packaging or sourcing, that
Yeah.
then spurs businesses to actually follow. So that's a huge one. I think consumers also can play a role in this by voting with their wallet. They have purchasing power. So when they make decisions and say, okay, I'm going to support this brand because I believe in what it stands for.
Yeah.
And then these brands with mission then, see a increase in demand, and then they can, continue to support the farmers who supply their products. And I think it's definitely multifaceted. And
Right.
like I said, the area that I'm currently working on to help scale is, holding our suppliers accountable.
Yeah. Okay, good. With regard to all these advances in technology now and AI, I know there are some restaurants in London that are using AI for menu planning and that type of thing and purchasing. Is there anything that you're currently either innovative energy saving technology or practices that are being implemented in Shake Shack locations using technology and
Yeah,
AI
I
in
don't
particular?
think at the moment that is something that we're kind of working on, but definitely not ruling it out. I think
Yeah,
it can play a huge role. I do think that a lot of our
yeah,
suppliers and the farmers and ranchers who we get product from also use AI and technology. I know this past weekend when I was at one of our hog farmers ranches, I was talking to them and they were telling me that, somebody they know is currently using AI to help with drones and figuring out, cropland, what that's a huge
mm,
piece for them that they can use help from. There's definitely a lot of ways to monitor energy at restaurant locations and figure out, okay, this location looks like it's using more energy than that location. Should we check on why? Like, is somebody leaving the lights on? Is the fridge not
yeah,
as like energy as efficient as it could be? So I definitely think there's a
right,
role for AI and sustainability, and something that we'll have to continue
yeah.
to kind of figure out what that looks like for our business.
One thing I was always intrigued by was whether you get much waste. I mean, because presumably, unlike a restaurant where, let's say, or a hotel where, let's say, you have a wedding for 300 people, and then 20 people don't show up. You've already produced that food, or you have a buffet at a breakfast, and then you all that food that's wasted just gets chucked in the bin, or donated to some sort of food angels who come and pick it up. And but presumably in a fast food setting, if they're really well oiled machine and everything's pretty much cooked to order, there's presumably not a lot
Yeah.
of waste. I mean, can you
No, I mean, you
elaborate a
said
little
it
bit on that?
perfectly. We have a really strong supply chain team, and they do an amazing job. We are only ordering what we are projected to sell, and we only make what is ordered. So the waste in back of house
Right,
is minimal. I did say earlier, there
right.
is of course waste in the prep area when we're cutting the veggies, and there's parts of the veggies that aren't necessarily edible.
Yes,
That's some waste, but really from a back of house standard,
right.
our waste is very minimal. That said, from a front of
Yeah.
house, when guests aren't finishing all of their food, I mean, there is waste associated with that, but it's a bit more complicated because we're not, we don't have
Yeah.
compost in the front of house yet, but definitely not ruling it out as something we pursue in the future.
Can you talk a little bit about the sort of design process? I mean, your restaurants are quite unique in the way that they're set up and laid out, and presumably there's some thought that goes into the energy efficiency of those spaces, because I notice how compact and and it's like it's tiered, where the grilling is going on
Mhm.
is on a higher level than the front of house people. How and and you seem to be able to keep that consistency with all different footprints of spaces, whether you're in Hong Kong and a very tight, or like New York, or if some places where you can be a bit more
Mhm.
generous with the space. How do you actually have like an in-house design team, and how
Yeah,
how
we
does
do
that
have
work?
an in-house design team, and I think it's something they are continuing to think about is restaurant design. So currently, like you said, most of our Shake Shack locations are uniquely designed. We are looking at how can we maximize energy efficiency at these locations. Where How are we building them so that we can utilize natural light? How are we building them so that the kitchen design makes sense, so that we're not putting our grills next to the cold station where we're trying to keep, the lettuce and tomatoes cold, because that will then use more energy.
Right.
So it's definitely something we're thinking about, and I know we're trying to kind of come up with more of a standardized restaurant design, so that way we are, really making an impact on how we're utilizing our resources.
Okay. Just shifting gears slightly, because I mentioned earlier about the sort of apparel side of it, and I just wondered if you, as a sustainability expert, had any thoughts about Shake Shack's approach to
Yeah.
employee uniforms. I mean, I know they all wear polo shirts, and I was curious about any initiatives to make uniforms more sustainable from your perspective, whether through eco-friendly materials, using bamboo or recycled plastic, that we like I used in the former hotel I was at, ethical manufacturing, perhaps a uniform recycling program. How do these things sort of tie into Shake Shack's broader sustainability goals
Yeah,
and company
I think
culture?
that it's a huge part. I always say that right now there is kind of a revolution, if you will. People are really interested in what they're putting in themselves and putting on themselves. So that includes obviously clothing and what our employees are wearing, their uniforms. We are working to figure out what the best way for us to approach this is. We obviously have a lot of locations and therefore a lot of employees. So trying to figure out what makes sense. Is it, utilizing sustainable materials? Is it creating a program where where we are recycling our uniforms? So figuring that out, and love hearing about what you guys did at the hotel, because I think that that's kind of where we'll learn and
Yeah,
figure out what might work best for us.
right. Yeah. Well, the two gentlemen that I'm helping with this program are actually going to be in New
Oh,
York for Fashion
cool.
Week for about 10 days. And they actually told, because I told them we were having this conversation, they'd be happy to sort of show you what they're doing. And they have this amazing factory where they manufacture all these hospitality
Cool.
uniforms and
Oh,
store
that's super
uniforms as
cool
well,
too.
from downcycled and recycled fabrics, and also things like bamboo and plastic bottles. When I was at the Hotel Icon, I did one big restaurant there which had about 35 employees, and all their
Awesome.
aprons and their shirts and the chef's uniform was all made from recycled materials.
Mhm.
And that was about 4 years ago. And interestingly enough, when they went back to them about a few weeks ago, they found out they were still wearing them. So usually the life cycle of a uniform
Mhm.
is probably about 18 months, but they're after four
Wow.
years, they're still going strong. So the interesting thing is also that I mean, you probably wouldn't need this, but they
Mhm.
do design. For instance, if it's a Marriott brand and they've got hotels in Marrakesh or Cairo or London, they can alter the design
Yeah,
features using AI, so you don't have design fees. So it's the company called Crestwell Attire, and they're quite new in on the scene. But although the factory's been there for 25 years, but they've now it's a bit like looking at a Tesla gigafactory, the way they operate. But it's really quite
yeah,
amazing, and it's also cheaper. So I think we talked about cost earlier, and these can be as
yeah,
much as 20% cheaper. So for a big chain like you,
yeah, cost
I mean, they can
savings.
scale this. And the good thing is, the staff can come on duty, be given their new employee tag, go to the website, and just order
Mhm.
their uniform straight off the
Yeah,
website, so which is pretty cool. So if you wanted to meet up with
yeah, I'd
Paul
be
and
happy
Mark,
to.
just for a half, they'd be really happy to show you. And I think your bosses would be interested to see this, because it's really, I don't know of anybody else doing this at the
Yeah,
moment. It's actually pretty amazing, and it certainly it sparked my interest, and I know with Icon it was a little bit different, because I had this license to experiment with things, but now I've introduced it to a couple of other hotel companies, and they're really impressed. So
yeah, make the
yeah,
introduction.
I'll be happy to. It's always useful for you to
Totally.
see
Yeah,
what's going on in
happy
that
to.
field.
Yeah, make that
Yeah.
introduction.
Okay. Well, that's brilliant. Well, I'm intrigued by what you said, and I think that, just out of interest, if a young person, I mean, I do a lot of mentoring, with students and people that I used to work with. If somebody was interested
Mhm.
into getting into your field of work, is there any little caveat or suggestion that you give them? Let's say
Yeah,
somebody has
yeah,
a hospitality degree and they're not really enjoying
yeah.
being in an operations setting. How could they
I
get into
think
what you're doing?
it's definitely, like, so worthwhile, because, I mean, every day I think about how I'm making a better impact on the planet. That said, I think when you're thinking about switching into sustainability, there are so many different avenues you could take. You could focus in, like me, on food. You could focus in on energy and work more on energy procurement, or where are they building renewable energy sites. I think you could look at, finance and doing financial modeling for renewable energy projects. So I think that there's so many avenues. So it's really figuring out within
Right.
sustainability what piques your interests, and then kind of taking it from there, setting up conversations with people who work in the field. I'm always happy to talk to people, because we're all working towards the same goal, and learning everything you can about the avenue that you're most interested in.
Well, that's brilliant. Great. Well, thank you ever so much, Corey. I really appreciate it. I know you're really, really busy, and I'll follow your interesting career trajectory myself. And I wish you all the best. And
Thank
I'd
you.
be very
Yeah,
happy to set you up to meet with my friends,
yeah,
Mark
go ahead.
Russell and
Me
Paul
too.
Chan. They can show you. It's pretty mind blowing what they're doing, and it's all live now. It's not like a startup. They're actually doing this. So I think they're supplying
Yeah,
already 16 schools in Hong Kong with all the
perfect.
uniforms and things like that. So, anyway, thank you ever
Wow,
so much, and I'll send you a copy of the recording. And I
of
really
course.
appreciate your help. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks, Corey. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye bye. Thanks.